It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
The next running back we're going to talk about here is Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm using half-point PPR data, and from that, he was running back 13 last year. Now, you look at those attempts, 278. Joe Mixon was a guy, this was a horrible team. They were 2-14 last year. From week 11 on, they were just trying to get back on the bus. He had no fewer than 18 carries from week 11 on, including weeks of 23, 25, 26. It was unbelievable the amount of times they were putting the ball in Joe Mixon's belly. We always think of Mixon, we go, isn't this guy a better receiver though, Dwain? So what is going on there? 45 targets is so low for a guy of his skill set. If those can come up, boy, the sky's the limit. We're talking about a top 5 level talent to me in terms of Joe Mixon for a fantasy running back.
Yeah, I agree. He's a very talented player. The issue is Gio Bernard being in the way, and he's still there. So, we'll talk about that here in a minute. Gio Bernard is like his Dion Lewis. It's a guy that gets on the field and doesn't even really do a lot, right? Gio used to have a little bit of flash to his game, but last year, even with the snaps that he took, like Gio's highest fantasy outpoint in a full point PPR, despite getting weeks where he had a decent role, 8 points. He had 8, 2, 3, 6, 6, 4. Yeah.
There's no reason to have him there.
Yeah, I don't get it, but it's problematic, and we know that Zach Taylor comes from the Sean McVay school of thought, and Sean McVay has been talking about trying to have a back like that since he got there, even whenever he had Todd Gurley as a stud. Remember, the first year he had Lance Dunbar, then they go out and they get Darrell Henderson, and that didn't work out. And so they're infatuated with this idea of this running back, and part of that comes from McVay's time, in Washington, where he loved Chris Thompson, and he loved getting to use Chris Thompson when he was under Jay Gruden there. And it seems that Zach Taylor, some of that is rubbed off. But for Mixon, the key thing here, it's a little different than Henry. Notice these RB1 games, greater than 25 points, only 2 of 16, so that's 13%. RB2 games, 38%. So between those two, we're sitting at 51. Half of my games I get RB2 or RB1, production from. And then you've just got too many games, Drake, down here. And the math on that's actually wrong. It should be 8 of 16 games. You've just got too many games down here at the bottom where he's under the 14, under the 14-point mark. And I'm looking at it right now on my other sheet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now 6 games is right for his under. And 6 games over. That's only 14 games, though. Did he just – anyway, so something's wrong on that slide. But the bottom line is it was a bit shaky. So here we can see the totals, all of it. So he only had 2 games, right, above RB1. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here, right? So the numbers were right. He's got 6 sitting here. The percentages were just wrong on the last page. Right. He's got 6 in between that. Yeah, he didn't play play what?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at a different guy.
You're looking at bye week. Don't talk to me, Drake. You're talking about his bye week. So anyway, So he had the 6 games in between.
Reference for not listing it as bye week.
Then you have 8 games, right, where he's under. So 50% of the games he's under an RB2. And some of those games are just not usable. 3.7, 5.7. I do want to point out for context, right? Context matters. He sprained his ankle in week 1. Mm-hmm. He still played though. He stayed in. He ended up leaving the game, I think, in the 3rd quarter. I got to go back and look at my notes, but there's some potential that some of this is him getting over the injury as well. Right now, I didn't put these percentages up at the top. I didn't have time of what happened with the routes, the dropbacks. So I'm just going to throw this ugly thing over here real quick. People will get over it.
I love that.
Yeah, but I'll just blow this up.
We're flying in graphics.
Yeah, so you can see the same thing though. Here's your dropbacks, right? So when your dropbacks 80%, right? Mixon has 4 points, 72%, 6 points, right? 72%, 10 points. Notice, like you said, they only dropped back to pass 49% of the time, and they were getting their wheels blown off by 36. It's like what you said. They were just trying to get the season over with, is what it felt like. And everybody was getting hurt. Remember, by now you don't have John Ross. AJ Green missed the whole season. There were some dings to Dalton later in the season. They ultimately, just gave Finley a shot. You lost your offensive first-round tackle and, in training camp. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of people hurt. It's just like, what's the incentive here to even be trying to win? But notice they just kind of stuck with this. And they didn't care. Again, getting beat by 21. They did have a game. What's interesting, the closest game they had at the end of the season, this 3-point loss, the closest game, they actually went back to more of a passing game. Okay. And again, look at Mixon, 9 points. So most people don't realize this about Mixon, but it's the same exact thing almost as Derrick Henry. He gets a few more targets than Derrick Henry. But notice he didn't start getting these targets that boosted him up to even get to be, at the 7 until he was staying on the field and Gio Bernard was not getting on the field, because notice what's happening with these snaps up here, right? Versus what Gio's getting versus earlier in the year. So there could be something, like I said, to the injury. So I'm going to get this back out of the way and pull these back up. But if you notice these snaps, same thing we just saw with Derrick Henry. In the games where they were passing more, look how low it is. In these games where they decided that they were not going to drop back to pass as much for reasons different than Tennessee. Tennessee's is truly game script, and I expect to see similar things. Here, I think we're going to see more passing from the Bengals this year with people being healthy, and you bring in Joe Burrow. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But notice, again, each one of those bad weeks that we saw lines up with these numbers that line back up to the stats. And then the same thing again here. So again, remember, blue is for the percentage of the rushes inside the 5 that Mixon had on a week. And then the orange is the percentage of carries for the team for the week. And notice he's like Henry, 77% of the carries inside the 5. That's really, really good. That's high leverage touches. 71% of the team's attempts. That's also really good. So even though Gio was getting on the field, it wasn't doing anything to Mixon's inside the 5 work. It wasn't doing anything to his percentage of carries for the week. What was happening is just like Henry, if they start dropping back more, he was still getting the same percentage of carries most of the time, but the pie was now smaller. And so the same thing that we saw. And then routes per drop back, again, similar thing, but even worse, really, if you can imagine that, right, than Derrick Henry. From a standpoint of routes per drop back, his target shares on a weekly basis are a little bit better. He didn't give you 3 donuts. But again, all of these weeks, except for 2, were below the RB2 threshold for routes ran for drop back. So what that tells us for Joe Mixon is we need Gio Bernard to go away. Mm-hmm. Or we need them to be in more competitive games where they are leading more. And so and that's what happened for Derrick Henry last year. Everything lined up and it was perfect for Henry. He was really efficient. They got on a roll down the end of the year. They were leading all the time. And I think that's a bigger question mark for the Bengals. I think the Bengals have more question marks. So that makes Mixon, I think he's fairly slotted behind Henry where he should be. I consider him to be slightly overvalued. I'm not going to scream at anybody for taking him just because you do know you're locked in to 65, 70% of attempts, 70+% inside the 5. The problem is the 6 to 7% targets. We can't just automatically say, oh, boom, he's going to get 10 or 12% like I'm seeing a lot of people do. What we would need to hear is that Bernard's role is being reduced. And if we did hear that, it's back to what you said, Drake, especially if the offense takes any kind of step forward, then Mixon is in the mix as a top 6 guy. And you may even say, I might like him over Dalvin Cook if you're worried about Dalvin Cook's shoulder, right? That kind of thing. We love Cook's offense better. We like his scheme better. We like the player a little better. But if you were worried about Cook's injuries, I mean, it's not like Mixon hasn't missed a couple of games each season except last year. But Mixon's a guy that we really need to hear that Bernard's going to be out of the mix. And I'm not hearing that yet. Everything I'm reading is that, Gio's still in the mix. So we'll have to see.
Plus, it's a brutal division. I mean, you're talking about.
Yeah, it is a tough defensive division.
Ravens, Browns are going to be better.
Yeah.